Hello, viewers, and welcome back to Brickyard. It is me, Janice Jolie, for Asian Heritage Month, and our next guest is Johnny D Trinh. Welcome, Johnny.
Hey everybody, it's great to see you all.
Johnny, congratulations on such a successful Versus Festival of Words. Johnny is the artistic director of Vancouver Poetry House and has been working there for a few years now. Johnny, you are a poet, an actor, a singer, a producer, a curator. Could you just tell our viewers the full breadth of the work that you do as an artist and producer?
I think the full breadth of the work is the struggle. I am
Oh,
very, I am very fortunate to live on the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish Associated Nations and the peoples herein, also known as Vancouver, as one of the main spots. And she's an expensive city, so the breadth of the work is oftentimes out of necessity. And but I will speak to my practice. Everything you said. One clarification: I have only been in the Vancouver Poetry House artistic directorship role for about 6 months or so, and but I've been curating and working with VPH for many years since like 2016 or so. So really honored to hold the reins for now and steward the work that's happening. Um, but a bit about my practice. Yeah, so I started off as an actor and trying to make it in film and television during the age of Joy Luck Club in the 90s. And that was a real struggle. And then I was always really practiced in engaged in theater and music theater. So went through music theater programs and really delved into theater as a practice of storytelling. But as we know, and it's identified, there was very little, and there's still challenging amounts of work for folks that look like us. And so in 2013, actually another amazing artist, Emma Dines, in the early 2000s introduced me to spoken word and deaf poetry jam, where I saw folks like Bosia perform. Like, what is this art form? What is happening here? And I realized that it sparked my interest in poetry, and I realized that I've been writing poetry since I was probably in grade 4 or 5. I remember putting on like writing, creating chapbooks back then, and I
so a
just
moment
went,
of recognition from
yeah,
watching Def Jam.
yeah, and it was really powerful to hear these stories in this way. And I think that for a lot of us, I'm totally going to ramble in this interview. For a lot of us, we were always trying to gravitate towards representation. And because there was a lack in my scope at the time, because I didn't know about our ancestors at the time and our elders and our people before us, I was spending a lot of time looking and associating, affiliating myself or feeling seen by a lot of the Black artists and Black communities creating work. In 2012, I moved to Regina, Saskatchewan, where you are, Treaty 4 land, and I started my MFA in Interdisciplinary Studies in Theater and Creative Technology. It's a big mouthful of words. And there I was introduced by Shayna Stock and my dear friend Jeffrey Steve at the time to spoken word and what is spoken word in Canada. And then so I started competing in the slam and started doing well. And then in 2013, I was able to go to my first national festival in Montreal at the time. And that's kind of the start of my poetry practice in terms of what it is right now. And since that time, I've been doing much work as a administrator, as an arts leader, and as a poet. Um, but I guess this is a very long answer, so I'm going to get to the point of wondering right now. Right now, I would describe my practice as a culinary poet. I've been
Ooh.
really yeah. This actually was a term coined to me by another artist colleague, because people were saying, "Oh, you're a chef." I'm like, "I'm not a chef. I don't have that same practice of teaching." But they said, "But what it is that you're committed to cooking. You're committed to the practice of cooking and learning about that and the ethnography behind it." So my practice right now really is rooted in using food as a catalyst, as a sensory catalyst and a memory catalyst to understand storytelling and the ethnography of how we tell our stories. I'm really, really interested in how, so for so many of us who are settlers and newcomers and not from these Indigenous lands here in Western Canada, the cost of our stories, whether it is import, migration, and just occupying space, how that has to live side by side by the indigenous communities who lose the ability to tell stories or lose memories because of our impact on the biosphere and ecology here. So, and also the fusion where different cultures can engage with the indigenous food and food systems here to create new stories and new memories. So I've been doing, I've just completed an artist residency in North Vancouver called Stories from the Kitchen, where we were trying to build bridges between very siloed ethnocentric communities by bringing in local chefs from those communities to cook and demonstrate and then do a circle storytelling, engage with Pierre Leichner, my co-artist in this one, just to build community. And it was a huge success. And right now I'm also the writer in residence at the Moberly Arts and Cultural Centre in Vancouver, where I'm working with a lot of predominantly Punjabi seniors. Again, we come in, we cook together, and we explore stories like, what was it like the first time having Canadian food? What was memories like when you first went back to where you consider home, one of the homes you consider, and then, or what kind of food stories you bring here, and just really talking about that as a starting point for stories. And it's been wonderful. It was actually the whole theme of Versus Festival of Words, gathering found family back around the table, just gathering to have feast together. I'll leave it at that. That was a long answer.
That's so wonderful, Johnny, a culinary poet. And so the sensory description of the food, the memory of food becomes your entry point into the stories and the words. Do you find, so this is like one aspect of poetry that you love, is what else about poetry and spoken word are you drawn to?
In the work that I do a lot of facilitation and education for artists, and I really deeply care about professional development in the craft of the work. And a phrase that often comes to mind for me is imagination tempered by memory. And and specifically, as I know that you have a huge pedagogy in your practice of of art forms. And for me, it's the idea of like how our bodies are impacted and change with breath work. So if you're breathing in the memory of your favorite meal, or you're breathing in this poetry and just letting it wash over you and you're sensing it through all your senses, that can be really transformative. And I feel like spoken word really lends itself to that experience. The idea of performing in front of an audience, having some sort of intimate live connection or an immediate connection, even if it's recording, when you're engaging with it. What I love about spoken word is the ability to transform in the moment and to feel your body engage and just viscerally remember something and trigger something in a safe, healthy way, hopefully, right? Or if it's not in a safe, healthy way, then how do we find that path together? And I think that's why I'm really gravitating towards food as a catalyst, because it brings in immediately those other senses as well, like taste and smell and touch and texture. And there's a liveness to it. It's thriving, living art form. And in some ways also it's ephemeral. Something that I didn't mention is I am the founder as well of the arts organization Stage to Page Performance Society, where we look at cross-disciplinary mentorship to really help a spoken word poet develop the practice and expand, whether it's to go into print or multimedia or interdisciplinary practice, just expanding the scope of the work. And yeah, so there's often this like push for us spoken word artists to like get published or make an album, and these things are like locked in an archive, but there's an ephemerality of the moment, that
Mhm.
connection, and then it's past. So yeah, that's what I love about it.
The live performance, and you
Mhm.
come from theater like me, so spoken word, what makes it different from the page is that it exists in the moment, and actually spoken word exists between us, right? I think about this, the words are in the air between us, between the speaker and the listener, and so it's that space in between that where spoken word exists. And it's like, because we have language as this means to understand each other, it's only there in that moment, as you say, it's ephemeral, and then it's gone. And I think the main thing with live performance is you need an audience. right? That like you, and it becomes communal. Whereas a page you can read on your own, and it's often a solitary experience. But the spoken word, it's usually done in groups. And this is like a main thing that a big thing that you do is like you're bringing people together. To our viewers, to tell them a little bit more about Stage to Page, you know, you're bringing in actors, musicians, poets, dancers perhaps too, and getting them to workshop a piece of writing and perform it in different ways, in different characters, with movement, with music. And this makes sense to me as a fellow multi-arts artist, that we don't have to limit the piece to one discipline or one way of doing it. And so I want to touch on this, like bringing together. Why are you always doing that? Why are you always bringing people together?
Because I'm lonely.
Oh, that's real.
It is real. That's
Yeah.
that. I think that we are all lonely at times, and it's okay to be lonely. But I think it's a matter of what context are we accepting that. One of the first things I said in this interview was the idea of the struggle.
Mm.
And specifically with Stage to Page, I came up with the program because I've had the privilege of working with probably like 10 to 20 different arts organizations in this coastal English area in a significant way, whether as a contract artist, but generally as an arts leader, as a consultant, as a contributor in some leadership role. And through that, I've had the affordance to engage with the dance community, the theater community, the film and television community, and the literary and the publishing communities. And all these different organizations were facing very similar challenges within the system of like scarcity and the system of grant funding and applications and whatnot. And so for so many independent artists trying to make their way, we're running into the same challenges. So I was really interested in, can we use the model from theater to help spoken word? Can we use a dance model in terms of how they run the practice, and also how they engage in getting funding or leadership or sustainability for that matter? How do those things apply? So with Stage to Page, I was really interested in a few things. One, absolutely the growth and expansion the of the artist, the poet who's contributing and submitting a work. And so in that environment, I have traditionally an editor, a publisher, a dramaturg, and then voice actors who are trained in voice and text, because so many of us spoken word poets don't know or have the experience of someone else reading our words literally on a different tongue. What does that mean? I know for us as queer Asian artists or Asian artists or queer artists or any sort of blend of intersectionality, where we write a very autoethnographic, autobiographical story, and someone else's
Mhm.
what's the meaning of that, right? And so I want to bring these mentors together to help show different ways of doing things. But what I love, my favorite thing, and that's why I was so grateful that I have you on the panel last time. I love it when masters of different practices speak to each other. There is
Yeah.
there's a big bang there, right? I mean, like having Bakaran, who one of the submitting poets, who has a degree, has a practice, a discography of using Punjabi and English poetry and connecting with hip hop and whatnot to talk, and saying, what is practice? What is art without an audience? It's a journal entry. So
Mhm.
like the idea of the connection, and to have someone like Krista Kudin, who is a celebrated Broadway trained film and television star, incredible vocalist, choreographer, works with the opera, amazing artists coming together to just play. And it's like to see masters talking is some of the best learning you can have.
So true. You know, we're talking about the struggle, talking about bringing people together. I think my next question was like, what are the most urgent issues that you face as a poet? And already we're talking about them, like the scarcity as we try to be poets and artists in this world. And I feel like what your method is to pull out the strengths from each discipline and put them together in like this delicious stew. So I'm going on this culinary metaphor. So as you say, we're going to bring that dramaturgy that we have in theater, and then we're going to bring like voice actors and then we're going to bring like the poet and the rhythm poet from like hip hop, and put them together in a room and see what happens live. So are you finding success with that? And like,
Absolutely.
how do you know what is artistic success?
I measure impact by the quality of the engagement and what happens next. So with Versus Festival of Words, there was so much work and so many challenges to get to where we got. But to be able to sit back and say, wow, we literally did everything we set out to do. Versus Festival of Words was a reinvigoration, a reunion, and a reintroduction. Words from you, how generations of poets don't know each other, so we can connect and meet and build that connection. Because one thing that I found as a young poet a few years ago when I was first practicing this practice, you could reach out to your mentors and leaders and elders. It was much closer connection. And so how I measure that success is the fact that after the festival, I see other cells, other enclaves building connection. All the artists from stage to page are like, let's collaborate, let's work together, let's do this thing. That was amazing. Let's do that, right? To see that that invigoration and that the galvanization of let's connect is really great. And also to speak to the idea of urgent issues, it also allows us to see how other individuals who may identify like us or with us or very different from us articulate their story. I think that especially during Asian Heritage Month and during our general practice in life and existence, I've been invited to and been part of several literary arts festivals in the world and performance festivals in the world. And there's this thing like, oh, you're the spoken word poet. Oh, you're the Asian poet, or you do this thing. And they mean well, but it definitely is limiting, right? When I had a few I shall remain nameless artists who are very established as literary art authors saying, oh, I just love the identity poems you do. I'm like, thank you. Did I show out? Did I upstage you a little bit? Maybe. But was that my practice? Yes, it was. Like all love, but like, come on. Right. And so sometimes the pressures of feeling like I need to do a blatantly Asian poem, or I have to embody that in a bigger way. I think that work like Crazy Rich Asians or Everything all Together All at Once or The Farewell, like these incredible pieces in art and films that help with representation. I think that they're just a start. That's only one category, because what's next is like us just existing and show that we exist and are living lived experiences we don't need to create extra content to be Asian. Here, it's every
Totally.
24/7.
Any content you make is Asian. And it's so interesting, Johnny, that a poet would say to you, I love your identity poems that you do in a pejorative way. Identity poem, it's this negative thing. And it's condescending. And yet, when a white person does a poem about going to the cottage, we don't call it a white person identity poem, right? Because they're seen as neutral, right? Like we could say that about a white person talking about anything. Oh, I love that white person identity poem you do, but we don't.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because they're not labeled in that way or categorized or racialized in that way.
I think that there's this we were talking about I was recently doing another interview around like the model minority myth and the concepts therein, and something we talked a lot about during the festival, the idea that so many of our racialized experiences continually are like different planets orbiting, circling whiteness. And when we have to like reoccupy the space, like the work of like Rhode Island is a great example of this, the idea of like, how do we occupy the space and regulate and say, no, we're just here. This is what's happening. And I think that's kind of where I just so deeply appreciate what you're saying about how we don't seem to do that to you. We're incorporating all of our languages. I drink coffee. This is an Asian thing. I go wash dishes. That's an Asian thing, right? Or whatever thing that I'm doing. It's
like you can't take off your Asianness to now write this poem. We
Exactly.
are in the body and life experience we are in.
Mhm.
Johnny, I got to hear a little bit of your poetry at the festival, and some of the poems that you're going to perform, that you've performed for Brickyard. Could you just tell our viewers, like, what you're writing about, why you're writing about these things, why they're on your mind right now?
Absolutely. I'm writing about food a fair bit. It seems to permeate the stories. And I'm writing about intimate family relationships. That's a
Mm,
very common theme right now in my work. I have a lot of, in my work right now, I've been speaking to many generations of poets. And there's a common sentiment from many people from our generation saying that, oh, these young poets are saying the same poem that's already been said. This isn't new. It's not innovative. It's not different, right? And in some ways, it's because the system hasn't changed. There's still lots of ways to go. But in some ways, there's a lot of nuance and change. And in some ways, there's also a lot of ignorance. And so for me, I think a lot of things I'm writing about is about intergenerationality,
mm,
generationality, and exploring like what it means for this story to exist next to this story. And also, we know that within spoken word in what is known as Canada, in this nation, the narratives are very young. So I'm really grateful to explore the context of an older narrative. What is it to share these stories as someone in their 40s? What is it to like echo a story or deal with things like dementia, family loss, aging in this, which these stories are, there's a gap here. I
mhm,
believe there's a gap here. So excited to explore that. So I'll be sharing some work around those things.
mhm.
And it's also, I'm so grateful for you and for the opportunity to share those works because I'm excited to hear it. I'll give this last plug. One of the projects I'm working on, thanks to the Canada Council, I was doing an exploration research grant for called Quiet Kitchen, and it really is the idea of so many of our stories come from the kitchen, from connection, from learning these recipes, from connecting with our elders or whoever else. But what happens when those elders are lost because of death, dementia, estrangement, disownment, migration, COVID? What happens when the kitchen's quiet? How do we build
Mm,
those connections still, right? And
mm.
so I'll be sharing some work from there. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Johnny Trinh, for being our guest. And do check out the poetry performance videos. And we can follow you on Instagram and check out your website, right, Johnny?
Yeah, so Johnny D Trinh on Instagram. That's the best way to follow me. And if you want to check my website, it's johnnydavidtrin.com. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thanks, friend.